Welcome back, everybody, and a very good morning to you from the Results Operations Centre. This is the National Results Operations Centre. Of course, there are different provincial offices all over the country representing the provinces and how the election counting is going. But it is, once those are counted, it's fed through to here, and that's where you start seeing the bigger picture coming through. But, you know, this election obviously is about what happens at a municipal level, and also looking into the provinces and who's going to lead what ward and what council and the seats that are going on. So there's just so much that there is still to determine right now. But, you know, the pictures that do come out are very, very interesting. I mean, we just had a crossing to the Western Cape. We were chatting about some of the different wards. And once you open it up and you have a look at it and you see where some of the votes are going, I mean, we see in the Beaufort West voting results coming through. Already, of the results that have been counted, we can see that the Patriotic Alliance got 25% of the votes. The DA is at 28%, and the DA, I beg your pardon, the ANC is 23% of the votes. So still counting happening, but it's interesting to see the Patriotic Alliance having a showing in different areas as well as in Gauteng. We see their name on the board there. Let's talk to them.
Very interesting. That reflects the surge of coloured politics or coloured nationalism in our country. You know, and it's also partly a reflection of the dire economic status, right? Citizens pretty much trust government that they will be treated fairly based on them being citizens. Because the values are that will treat you regardless of who you are, because we are all equal. However, if they don't get that equal treatment, if they feel that government ignores them for some reason, what then happens is that civic ties that binds us purely on the level of citizenry, at a value level, are weakened. We then go towards blood ties, familial ties. Instead of trusting that we'll be treated equally on the basis of the law, we trust that because you and I are related, you will, take care of me a lot better than the state. So primordial identities start kicking in. We colored, right? So that identity is more reliable, that you will take care of me over a civic identity that is based on values. So the emergence of nationalism, of identity politics, is an indication of the distrust on the state that is impersonal. The state is impersonal, it's out there, but you and I, being colored, there's something that brings us closer, that makes me trust that you'll take care of me. So with a dwindling economy, you are weakening civic ties. Politics fragments and primordial identities take over. Initially, perhaps at this ethnic level, and amongst perhaps colored folks, but at some level, you might see it extending to other ethnicities as well. And this is, I'm afraid, we've been talking about South Africa not being exceptional compared to the rest of the continent. I think we are beginning to prove that true. The example I was making earlier about everybody fighting for a cake of the public service to get into politics, that is what has made most of our politics in the continent unstable. The coups that you have, the prevalence of ethnic politics is pretty much an indication of a weak economy, almost non-existent private sector, with only the public sector as the main employer. That scenario that exists around us in this continent is increasingly replicating itself here, which then means that we need to pay attention to expanding the cake. Ideological debates don't mean much, right? So this is a crisis. I mean, I can't say this. I can't overemphasize this. And the danger is not so much in this turnout, but it's in the potential violence that's likely to emerge out of this because of the desperation.
And just before we speak to violence, we'll come to that in a minute. But sticking with identity politics
Yeah.
and looking at the colored question,
Yeah.
or for those who don't necessarily buy into the term, who would say so-called colored, but there are people who self-identify as colored.
Yeah.
And it's not for you and I to tell people how they should identify. So for those who do identify or self-identify as colored, this election, of course, is equally pivotal, because here you have a community that says nobody cares about us. We've been left on the periphery of society, and people only look to us when they need us for one or other reason. And then you have a party like the Patriotic Alliance, and we mentioned them yesterday briefly, saying that you could see the Patriotic Alliance working the ground well before other parties got into election mode. They went into what were traditional colored areas, and they were the ones who were fixing the sewer pipes. They were the ones who were trying to mend the infrastructure, calling on business people in these areas to come and assist so they can help themselves, as it were, to your point, where the civic ties fray. I'm not sure how strong they were to begin with, but where they are fraying, you see people looking more inward.
You see, in PE, where I come from, you had a broad front in the northern areas, in the townships, and that sustained a little bit into '94, into the early 2000s. But at some level, you also had African chauvinism creeping in. I think even though the ANC does a good game of talking on racial politics, I think in terms of their selection of councillors, for instance, and perhaps in provision of services, colored folks in the northern areas of PE and in Zwide, New Brighton, live under similar squalor conditions. So there was a sense that there's more attention being paid to the townships more than the northern colored areas where colored folks live, right? So that management, and of course at some point there was a disappointment that you are doing so much for colored folks, but they're not reciprocating, they're not voting for this part. But you don't give up because you did not get the good results initially. This is an ongoing project. Non-racialism is an ongoing project, especially because you still have prejudice. So it's you have to be happy with the small gains, and after a while, these gains then accumulate into something bigger. I think we kind of gave up too soon on the non-racial project. We do a good game of talking about it. I mean, in the southern areas, for instance, of Joburg, people are complaining about informal settlements creeping in. I remember 3 weeks ago, I was driving down to Bloem. Just when you pass Anaday, there's a whole country of informal settlement. And these are middle-class houses, right? People who have invested their money, some of them are retired, they cashed in their money to build fancy houses, and these houses are meant to be assets, right? You're not saying that people should not be built, should not settle somewhere, but there needs to be protection of property for middle-class folk. That's what life is about. Uneducated parents sending their kids to school so that these kids can get good jobs, can get better houses. These houses become assets they can borrow against. Life is about mobility. And it doesn't mean because most people are here, you have to bring everybody here. The point is mobility, not to go down. So we've been making a lot of excuses. People deserve housing. You can't vacate. I mean, you can't remove them from these pieces of land. The point is, you cannot run a city where there's just people do as they please. You need proper demarcation, special demarcation. People need to build informal settlements in areas that are earmarked for infrastructure. You know what happened? People move into an open space. There's no infrastructure. 3 months down the line, they start toying that there's no infrastructure, as if you sent them to move into that space, right? Previously, some of the councillors would earmark a space and say, this is the land, we'll start putting in infrastructure, so people should be channeled towards certain designated areas. But now, and politicians are very opportunistic, right? At one point, they would say, no, we should stamp down on illegal occupation. At other points, they say, no, these are our people. We can't remove them. And yet, they start toying, they disrupt traffic. You know, we just need to do things differently.
We need to deliver. It's a simple question of delivering what the people
We just need to do things
There's
differently.
there's another thing we need to do. It's take a break. We have to take a break. We'll see you after this. Lots more analysis and results here on SABC News. Stay tuned.